Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to First Parish, Unitarian Universalists of Arlington.
We choose.
We choose.
We choose to be
A liberal religious community.
Welcoming.
Welcoming to all.
We encourage each other
on our spiritual journeys.
Support one another
through the changes in our lives.
And challenge the excesses
and injustices of our time.
Called to love.
To love.
To love.
And upheld by joy.
We live our faith.
This was a challenging week in our country, brutally sad. And so we gather in so many ways to hold that devastation and the joy that may have come into our lives as well. And so I invite you into a communion of prayer and meditation. O holy presence, the love that will not let us go. We rest in this season of new life, gathered as a beloved community. Among us there has been sorrow just as sure as there has been joy. Both are embraced and held. On this day when mothers are honored and appreciated, we join hands with those for whom this day is one of joy and thanksgiving, just as we join hands with those for whom this day is one of sorrow and grief. We give thanks for the blessings this day will surely bring. We pray that these blessings, that beauty, the peace of the sanctuary, the power of human connection will ready us for the days ahead. We just sang together, for the world, we raise our voices. May we raise our voices and meet the challenges of the day in our personal lives and in our country with a righteousness fueled by love. And may the congregation say, Amen. I invite you into a communion of silence as we hold all that has been shared.
I'm Ellen Lee. I'm chair of the Indigenous Justice Working Group, part of the Social Justice Committee. Today is the Shinn Service, which honors Barbara Shinn and her commitment to justice. Barbara served as chair of what was then known as the Social Responsibility Committee. An educator and leader, she had a passion for teaching children with disabilities. She displayed personal courage in the face of debilitating illness, arthritis of the spine. Each year, the Social Justice Committee selects a speaker to address a matter of public concern. Shinn speakers have focused on a variety of social justice issues, including racism, capital punishment, urban poverty and violence, the war in Iraq, marriage equality, economic justice, and climate justice. Before I formally introduce Jordan Clark, here in Native space, and remember we are always in Native space, I am so grateful to Jordan for bringing his voice and his perspective to our meeting house. When I reached out to Jordan a few months back, he shared with me that he had grown up in Cambridge and did not grow up going to church on Sundays. So for him to say yes to preaching here, a service, is really quite something. I appreciate his willingness to be open, also because so much harm has been done by organized religion, including our congregational ancestors. And I am grateful for this opportunity for us to be in right relationship with Indigenous people, with Jordan, and to be able to work in solidarity to build a more sustainable future for us all. Jordan is an enrolled member of the Wampanoag Tribe of Aquinnah, located on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. He has an undergraduate degree in political science and an MA in international affairs with a focus in governance and rights. In his role as the executive director of the Harvard University Native American program, Jordan oversees an administrative team that's focused on recruitment and outreach, direct support of students, faculty, and staff, university programming, public programming, and tribal diplomacy. Prior to joining HUNAP, he was the Director of Community Programs for Equity and Inclusion at the Cambridge School of Weston, also faculty in their history department. And Jordan ran after-school programs for youth in the South Bronx and is the co-founder of the Babel Project, a documentary film and activism organization teaching youth around the world how to tell their stories and affect change in their communities. Jordan's dedication to empowering young people to benefit community is central in his spirituality and values and central to how he navigates the world around him. I look forward to hearing him speak and also to reverberation session directly following the service where we can engage in conversation and hear more about Jordan Clark's ideas and thoughts, and everyone is welcome, including light refreshments after the service. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Can everybody hear me? Thanks. Thank you, Ellen. Winikisuk. My name is Jordan Clark, and as you heard, I'm a citizen of the Wampanoag Tribe of Aquinnah. I currently live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm the executive director of the Native American program at Harvard University. I wanted to begin by thanking you all for having me here. As Ellen said, it's not often that I step into Christian spaces of worship, but when I am invited, it's a nice time for me to reflect on my history, my connection, and the future of how we kind of build community together. I come here today to share about myself, my spiritual journey, and the tensions around the duality of faith and values that I've had to navigate throughout my life. And I hope that sharing some of this stuff allows you to think about some of those tension points or dualities or understanding other perspectives. And how do we learn from those things? So I was born on Martha's Vineyard, but I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I spent most of my summers on the vineyard, and specifically in Aquinnah on the west side of the island. And growing up there in community, I learned about a lot of things. I heard the stories of Mashup, which you heard a little bit from the book earlier, how he created Martha's Vineyard by dragging his toe in the water and separating it from the mainland. I learned about how he would wade into the water and pull whales out of the ocean to feed our people, that the colors of our clay cliffs come from the processing of those whales to feed us, that there are very few trees, and they're oddly shaped in Aquinnah because he would rip them out of the ground to smoke his pipe, and the mist that comes off the water into Aquinnah is the smoke from his pipe. This was part of my childhood and how I grew up. I grew up fishing with my great-uncle Carol, learning how to do so and how that can sustain and feed a community and a family. I ate quahogs and cranberries. And I was in community and thinking about what that meant and the responsibility and relationship that creates. At the same time, I spent a lot of time in Cambridge, Massachusetts, learning about social justice and progressive ideals, being around my friends and riding bikes and riding the subway, and growing up like many, many folks do in this area. But these two worlds kind of shaped who I was and how I saw myself and how I saw my connection to others. What does it mean to be in relationship? In thinking about this, it's helpful to think about Wampanoag history. Currently, there are two federally recognized tribal nations in the state of Massachusetts, both being Wampanoag. One is located in Mashpee on Cape Cod, the other is Aquinnah on Martha's Vineyard. We also have a state-recognized tribe as of a year ago in Herring Pond as well. But at its height, the Wampanoag Nation was 70 distinct villages across eastern Massachusetts, and it was a matriarchal system. That is not what we see today, but is the story and the understanding that we have growing up in community. So I grew up hearing all these stories. How do we be in relationship? What is the history of my nation? All the ways in which we understand ourselves and our connection. And I also grew up in Cambridge, learning a different history. Learning about the Pilgrims, learning about Thanksgiving. Really learning about, whether it was conscious or unconscious, the reality that most folks believe that Native peoples are from the past and not the present, and definitely not a part of the future. A good example of this is Gene O'Brien's book, Firsting and Lasting, really looking at this area as we think about settler colonialism and being the incubator for that colonial system that is used across the continent to eradicate Native nations. Hundreds of years before you get things like the Dawes Act and boarding schools and reservations, all those systems are being piloted here in what is the state of Massachusetts. So how do you, as a young Native person, grow up in a very progressive, very social justice-minded space, grow up hearing those stories being celebrated as core values of what we know as the United States and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts today? Internally, it makes you think, how can these histories be in opposition to one another? How can an individual hold these two realities and try and keep them in balance? Where do you belong? What is true? Can both be true? What if one is true and the other one is not? How do you navigate that within your community? How do you go back to Aquinnah and be in community and maybe forget the things you learn in public school? How do you sit in a public school classroom and hear an adult talk about these issues? Do you stay silent? That's a really challenging place to kind of navigate as a young person, and as we all know, young people are dealing with a lot of different things as they're growing up. Externally, how do you deal with that in an institution or a community? Do you stay quiet? Does that breed anger, frustration, confusion? We all think about the relationships that we have and the belonging that we hope for. How do you grow up in a system where you don't necessarily think you belong if you're listening to stories that don't directly reflect your realities? And with this kind of issue of alignment, how do you navigate a world and a system that maybe doesn't see you for all the ways that you see yourself? A lot of the questions I asked myself was I only Native in the summer when I was in Aquinnah? Did I have to be something else in other spaces? How do you give correction or new information, and how do people receive them? I think it's challenging when you're dealing with going to Plymouth Plantation and seeing the celebration of the establishment of a system that was built on top of yours, that was built to eradicate yours. How do you look at your peers in classrooms and say that isn't necessarily true? It doesn't represent the real and complex history when you're dealing with friendship and relationship and all these other things. But as I grew, there was a turning point. I realized that as I got older, that duality, the ability to navigate both of those systems, was not necessarily a weakness but a strength. That I was able to navigate both worlds and did not feel like I had to choose. That growing up in Cambridge and the core values that were taught to me about what it means to be responsible, not just for myself, but my community and those who don't have a voice, isn't in opposition to the way that I was learning things in Aquinnah, even though some of the content and substance didn't necessarily match. I realized that I had an obligation, that when we talk about relationship, there is obligation within relationship, that I had an obligation to teach, not only in my community, in Aquinnah, but also my community here in Massachusetts and in Cambridge. That I had to learn how to build bridges. That I had an obligation to help younger folks learn how to navigate these dualities. I realized growing up that the folks who came before me had to do the very same things that I did, just in different ways. And so there are folks coming after me that I have a responsibility to. And then I have a responsibility to represent my community and bring visibility to it in a contemporary and authentic way. And that's what brings me here with you all today. So, the big question in the room is, why do I work at Harvard? The Commonwealth and Harvard cannot be separated in their history. I believe in the Constitution of our Commonwealth, Harvard is named in that as an entity. And to be honest, when I applied to work at the Native American program, that was a big question for me. Harvard's history is directly linked to some of the challenges that I listed earlier. Harvard is founded in 1636. It is not the beacon on the hill. It is not the shining, bright place to be educated as you might know of it today. It is a failing institution financially. So in 1650, they rewrite their charter. They reorganize the leadership of the university, but they also strategically put a line in their charter that says that the university will educate both English and Indian youth of this country. And they do so because it gives them the opportunity to raise funds from Christian institutions, both here in the colonies and in England, to educate Native people. The first Native graduate of Harvard College is Caleb Chishatimuk in 1665 from Aquinnah. 5 individuals end up going to the Indian College when it is built. He is the only one to graduate. Everyone else passes away either from disease, they choose to leave the program, and Joe Ayakums, who's also from Aquinnah, passes away in a shipwreck 2 weeks before graduation and is not given his degree even though he finishes all of his coursework at the top of his class. That funding, even though by the 1670s, the Indian College is not functioning in that way, only that cohort goes through that educational process, and the building is eventually torn down. The funding for that Indian College is the foundation of Harvard's endowment today. And the Charter of 1650 is still the living governing document of Harvard University today as well. So that responsibility put forth in 1650 to educate Native people still exists today and is a responsibility of the university. So Harvard directly benefits from that promise, and the return on investment for Native communities of the region, not so much. HUNAP, as it's known today, is really started in 1970 with the American Indian program at the School of Education. We are built to be an administrative team to recruit and do outreach to Native students and students interested in Native studies, to do direct support for Native students, community programming, public programming, and more recently, tribal diplomacy with regional nations. We're also here to help illuminate the history of Harvard and that responsibility. Even after the Indian College is no more, the Algonquin Language Bible, the first Bible printed in the Western Hemisphere, is one of the tools used to forcibly convert Native people to Christianity. Folks here realized that it was quicker to teach people Christianity in their native language than to teach them English and then Christianity. That the next graduate from Aquinnah to graduate from Harvard College after Caleb in 1665 was Tiffany Smalley in 2011. That through Christianity and those practices, Harvard directly funds praying towns, which are built to push Native people out of their communities and into new Christian communities, to directly pay Harvard alum to become overseers of Native communities. Native people were forced to be wards of the state and have Christian overseers in their towns. And again, all of the systems that we know that were built to eradicate Native nations on this continent were piloted here, and Harvard has a direct connection to. So, it's important for us to understand that this work is important. I talked a little bit about responsibility, that I see a responsibility that I have for those who are coming after me. Harvard has an opportunity to provide access and resources and opportunity to young people from everywhere, including Native nations. But the choice to go to a colonial institution, one so directly connected to the challenging histories that I've talked about, is not easy. So having support and access once you get there is important. And HUNAP kind of sits in that space to allow folks who are exploring Native histories and also from Native communities to have a direct support system as they navigate those things. I think the duality that I'm speaking about today is one that others can probably connect to, regardless of where you're from and what you've experienced. The work that I do at HUNAP is really helping others navigate that duality and the choices that we all have to make, and to really think about and reflect upon responsibility. What I've come to understand is that the measure of someone's character is not how they act with the knowledge that they have or have been taught, but is what they do when they're confronted with new information that counters their understanding, beliefs, and way of seeing the world. My work is to help students at Harvard navigate this and in moments like this with other communities. So in closing, I ask you all today to find ways to challenge the things that you're certain of, especially as it relates to Native nations and histories of this region, even if it shakes the very foundation of your beliefs. Thank you.